Good evening, MDF. I had to pause there because I wasn't sure my mental calculations would allow me to work out the time in your part of the world. Um, yes, it must be evening. I hope you have eaten. I hope you are relaxing. And I hope today has been okay for you. Um, I've been up for 6 hours. Um, Catching up on various things. I still haven't done half of the things I want to do, but there is no hurry. I will get round to doing things. I know it has been nice to be relaxed for 48 hours or so. Sorry if I have been unresponsive and isolated. I'm feeling absolutely fine, I promise, and I'm really keen to get back to doing readings for you. But I was saying, did have something. Oh yes, I knew what I was going to do. Oh, I'm an idiot, I've forgotten. Related to a river town, and in a sense developing from it. We can go back to that, or keep it as a regular thing. Is this blog by Jessica White? I want to read to you some of her words. We've never met, but we were sort of internet friends 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm delighted to see that her writing career continues. And I will certainly, when it comes all the way from Australia, her copy of A Curious Intimacy, which was her first novel. I want to read some of that to you if I may. And just as a kind of taster, and you probably almost certainly haven't had time to explore her blog, which was where I used to hang out and read, one of the few blogs ever worth reading, to be honest, and chat with her about things. A conversation went downhill when I started bluffing about Christava, only to find that she actually read Christava and understood her no less. And at which point I decided that she was clearly a lunatic, because people who understand Christava usually are. So I found what I'm going to read is just something that I hope touches upon your life or Keneally's work, and certainly her life. She's back in Australia now. She was in London for a long time. This is an entry from her blog entitled The River. The Brisbane River, looping and curving through suburbs and high rises, drifting beneath bridges and nudging alongside parks, is Brisbane's defining feature. It draws cyclists, dog walkers, coffee devotees, runners, and lovers to its edges. And what it lacks in sparkle, as with Sydney's harbours, it makes up for with its breadth and breeziness. Running over the Story Bridge and alongside the floating walkway, I was one of many who believed that the riverside symbolised the city's laid-back tenor. It was partly this insouciance, combined with a decade of drought, that erased the memory of earlier flooding, that made the deluge of water such a shock. Even as flash floods in Toowoomba left people clinging to telephone poles and cars stacked against one another, Crowds were gathering alongside of the Brisbane River with their cameras and umbrellas, for it was raining still, to watch water swell against its banks. With only the increasingly sensationalized media reports and a fevered imagination for company, and not wanting to be cut off from my sister by a creek that would definitely flood, I packed my favourite frocks, boots, handbags, novels, and journals into a backpack and decamped to her place. "Did you seriously bring all that shit?" she commented, seeing it spill over the floor as I unpacked. "As if I would leave my Colette Dinnigan dress behind," I returned. "And my Spencer and Rutherford handbags. And my red stiletto boots from London." I was told that I was an idiot. The power was cut off at 3 p.m, so we went for a walk to look at the flooded creek. I had gone for a run that morning, and the paths upon which I had pounded were now covered in water. It crept insidiously over the footpaths and road, and while ants ran along drain pipes to find dry land— sorry, I read that wrong. And while ants ran along drain pipes to find dry land, a father rode his bike through the water, followed by his small son, who clearly struggled as the water came up to his knees. The father didn't lift a finger to help. Men in four-wheel drives and Range Rovers drove their vehicles through the water to shore up their brawn. Sister and I sniggered. The sun came out for what seemed like the first time in weeks, and burnt me in an hour. Evening fell, and tired from adrenaline caused by said overheated mind, and a general apprehension of the unknown, and having no light by which to read, I went to bed early. My brother-in-law, being ex-army, was thrilled by all the drama, and on Thursday he was disappointed to find that the river wouldn't approach the same levels as the 1974 flood. Sister and I wandered off for a coffee at the local cafe, which was heaving and had run out of soy milk. A lady before us, who also wanted soy, went off to the shops and came back with more, and I was a happy bunny again. I was even happier to get home to power, a hot shower, and the internet. My inconveniences were tiny compared to those whose homes had filled with muddy water and sewerage. I went for a cycle on Friday around Docklands and New Farm, and was dismayed and saddened by the streets piled with stained couches, chairs, and general detritus. Volunteers were shoveling mud from the streets. New Farm Park was silted up and attended to by water birds. Sydney Street Ferry had crumpled, and a boat had mounted the boardwalk at Docklands. A marshy smell lingered in the air, reminding me of floods on our property when I was a child. Subsequent reportage has indicated the folly of allowing houses to be built on what are floodplains. In addition, Anthony Funnell points out how gentrification and greater urban density has meant that traditional Queenslanders built on stilts, I guess they're names of houses, aren't they, are now being renovated and closed in. The stilts were to allow houses to be built into Brisbane's hills, and to keep the upper levels dry during floods. After a decade without Dorothea McKellar's, quote, steady soaking rain, end quote, people had forgotten to build for Brisbane's climate. Then there is the controversy relating to the management of Wivenhoe Dam, which is facing questions of whether more water should have been released prior to the flooding, and if the failure to do so in a timely way was in fact the cause of Brisbane's floods. While the dam management was undertaken in a complex and increasingly stressful situation, there were also several warnings from the Bureau of Meteorology in the previous months about flooding. By the same token, having come out of this decade of drought, the decision to release precious drinking water would have had to be undertaken by someone, quote, with very large balls, unquote. However, the lack of foresight extends beyond this to a national level. As Germaine Greer, oh God, she doesn't, does she? Writes in a surprisingly lucid article, the pattern of drought and flooding of the interchange of El Niño and La Niña has been well documented in Australian history. Given this, she notes, the rest of the world might well be scratching its head as to why more wasn't done, why boats remained moored as the Brisbane River rose, why we have so readily relinquished our precious topsoil. It seems to be, as one person wrote in the comments, that we are, quote, living in a disaster-prone country with mediocre approach to problem solving. Thus, the blame game begins to gather momentum. Should homeowners be held responsible for their lack of foresight in buying near the river, creeks, or floodplains? Should developers such as Mirvac, who built the flooded Tennyson Reach and misinformed buyers of the risk of flooding, be held accountable? Or should we hold local government to task for rushing to accommodate Brisbane's growing population with poor town planning? Or should the management of Wivenhoe Dam be culpable? What is clear is that there needs to be more awareness of Brisbane's environment, as demonstrated on an intimate level by the original inhabitants of the area, the Jagera and Turrbal people, who were supported by the river's abundance of fish, shellfish, crabs and shrimps, and who lived with the environment rather than attempting to control it. Although such symbiosis is largely impractical in contemporary society, it does flag a more responsive relationship to the land, which might have been useful in avoiding the floods. While politicians squabble over funding for rebuilding, and Tony Abbott feebly attempts to hijack the floods to derail the NBN, the community has responded overwhelmingly. Queues for volunteers stretched around the blocks and were eventually turned away. Clothing companies are donating 20% of profits, and Queensland's writers are banding together to donate books, workshops, and manuscript assessments. Sorry to be cynical, but the last thing you need in a bloody flood is someone who reads and writes telling you what. No, that's being harsh. I'll stop. Oh, here we are. If any readers are after a copy of A Curious Intimacy and would like to donate at the same time, visit here. There's a link to somewhere here. Oh, right. Well, I was after a copy of Curious Intimacy, and I think it's on the way. I might have to go where she suggests afterwards if nothing happens. Also up for bids are manuscript assessments, performances, and a plethora of wonderful books. Please give freely and generously to add to your library and to help those who have been affected by the floods. Bidding closes at 11 p.m. Brisbane time on Monday the 24th of January. Oh, well, needless to say, I've missed all that completely. As the city struggles to restore itself, we are forced to revise our impressions of the Brisbane River. No longer does it seem a benign and beautiful feature of a carefree city. Rather, it is a force of which, having the capacity to wipe out life and livelihood, we should be wary. We would do well to remember its dormant power. Hmm. Um, well, I think she writes extremely well. Wonderfully, in fact, and I hope you agree. Uh, I'll keep scanning her blog and see how she's getting on. And I hope you're getting on absolutely fine too, MDF. And we'll be in touch.